Hello, hello. I am so excited to be here to talk to you about driving user engagement with watchOS 3. So thank you to Kate and Hector for fighting over my introduction. So let's get started, and it probably would help if I had a clicker. Okay, so before we get started with watchOS 3, I want to talk about what user engagement means to all of us. So usually when we think of a user, let's call her Hectorina, after my favorite MC. So Hectorina, this is actually the feminine version of Hector. I looked it up. When we think of Hectorina actually interacting with our apps, we think of her literally, directly using her phone, right? And this could be, her checking her weather app, or looking up the best Italian food in New York, or checking out her pictures of her friends on Instagram. There's a lot of different varieties, but essentially it all boils down to her literally directly interacting with her phone. But what about all the types of user engagement where she might not be looking at her phone, like she's glamming herself up, getting a new haircut, or lighting up the dance floor with some awesome salsa moves. Hectorina can totally pull that off, right? And maybe she's catching some waves. So all of these cases, she's not going to be interacting with her phone. And how are we supposed to be able to get her to do this? And how are we supposed to be able to give her what she needs when she's not even interacting with her phone? Well, luckily, with watchOS 3, we can use 3 different new features that will help drive us to do this. So these are complications, background tasks, and local notifications. So let's get started. Now, with complications, they're essentially, if you're not familiar with Apple Watch development, they're essentially the widgets on the watch face here. And it's actually a term borrowed from real mechanical watches. So back in the old days, they would create these complications that would go on your watch face that would allow you to do things other than tell the time. And, well, they were fairly complicated to create. I think the most expensive watch out there had 32 mechanical, physical complications. So it was kind of a cool term that was borrowed from Apple for this. Now, the interesting thing with watchOS 2 is that most of the watch faces had about 2 to 5 different complication slots. So you can see here, this is the modular watch face, and it basically has about 5 slots. So a lot of the times, users would be limited to only 2 to 5 slots for complications. Fortunately, now with watchOS 3, Apple's made it a lot easier to swipe in between all of the different types of watch faces out there. So that basically means that users have an unlimited amount of complications now. So super cool and really useful for us as app developers. Now, because of this, a lot of times users are probably going to be theming their watch faces. So you can think of this as essentially a way for users to create themed watch faces that they might not use daily, but would be very useful in the moment. So this, for example, is showing a workout-themed watch face. So you can see here we have a big emphasis on our activity. We have the workout app and the heart rate app kind of in the top 2 corners as our complications. And this would be useful for a variety of different cases. You can think of it for travel, for example. A lot of us came here via plane or any other source of transportation, and so you can think of a travel watch face being super useful, something that shows our flight status, maybe the weather in New York, and also the local time. So there are a lot of different great use cases for these themed watch faces. Now, the other cool thing about this is you'll probably notice that there's the 2 different complications here on the top left and right corners are actually just static images that are shortcuts over to 2 different apps. So this is another way that allows users to quick access to all of the different apps that they have on their watch. Now, to actually implement a complication, this is all that we need to do. Don't worry, it's not this bad, actually. So the top half of this is primarily just configuration code. So it's one of those things that you kind of set once and forget about, as long as your app's functionality doesn't change. The main thing that we want to actually worry about is the timeline population code here. So let's dive into that a little bit more. In order to create our timeline population code, this essentially allows us to create a timeline of data that we'll use to present on our complication. So the timeline concept is this thing that allows us to create basically a whole array of data of what we want to display at certain hours throughout the day. So you can see here, this is a great example of a weather app where it shows the temperature changing throughout the day. What's interesting about this is that it also allows us to use this feature called time travel. Now, time travel, if you're not familiar with it, essentially allows you as a user to scroll the digital crown on your watch and be able to advance the hours so that you can go forwards and backwards in time and check out what's happening in the future and in the past. What is really interesting about this, though, is as of the latest betas for watchOS 3, this has actually become an optional thing. It used to be required. And for all users, it's actually turned off by default. So what's cool about this, for us as app developers, is that you may not exactly need to support time travel and timelines in general in this case. So if I were you, instead of having to support all 3 of these delegate methods, it goes from 3 down to just 1 now. So if you remember that huge block of complication stuff that we had to worry about, now most of it's just configuration, and this is the only method that you really have to support. OK, so how do we create a complication? Well, we'll first create a timeline entry and a complication template. And let's take a look at what templates look like. So templates are just various ways of displaying information to our users just based on different styles of watch faces. So you can see here there's a version of the modular small watch faces, or complications, as well as some various other ones, depending on the different styles of watch faces that you can see. Now, you can see here there's a variety of ways. You have both images and text, and combinations of both. Let's take a look at what the modular large template looks like. So you can see this is a modular watch face here on the right, and it's the largest complication here in the middle. Breaking it down even more, you can see with the modular large complication, it has basically 3 different lines of text: the header at the top and the 2 lines of body text underneath it. And to do that, this is all we need to do for that template. We want to specify which type of template it is, that modular large one, as well as the 3 lines of text underneath it. So you can see here we've made it really easy to exactly replicate the lunch with Lucas here on the bottom. Now, I have simplified this a little bit. You most likely will want some sort of dynamic content for your complications. But if you remember back to this screen where we saw just 2 static images that allowed you to launch different apps here, if you're planning to do this with your complication, then it can basically be as easy as just that static text before. Awesome. OK, so let's move on to background tasks. So with background tasks, there's a really cool new feature in watchOS 3 called the dock. And what this allows us to do is to actually scroll back and forth between our 10 most favorite watch apps and launch them instantly. The other cool thing about this is that while users are scrolling through their apps, they can actually update in the background. And without having to tap into any of these, you can get the latest updates and notifications from your apps without having to do anything through background tasks. So let's see what kind of background tasks there are for us. We have our basic application refresh background task, snapshot refresh, URL session, as well as watch connectivity. So with application refresh, this is the first thing that we need to do to get started. Usually you'll start an application background task in order to trigger some of your other ones. So from here, you can trigger a snapshot, or you can trigger an NS URL session pull from the background. Moving on, we have our snapshot refresh. So with this, this allows you to actually make updates to your app's UI, and you can push, pop, and present view controllers from this. So it's a really cool way to actually interact with your UI elements all in the background and be able to display this up-to-date interface to your users immediately. URL session is fairly similar to a background URL session task that you do on your regular iOS development. So here you can trigger NSURL session to go out to the server and pull out any updated data that you want to show to your user. And last, but certainly not least, is our watch connectivity refresh background task. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, watch connectivity is a way that allows you to transfer data between your watch and your phone via its Bluetooth connection. And so you can see here, this allows you to grab the latest data between your two devices in the background. Now, you might be wondering why we would actually need a background task for this if we already have NSURL session. Like, why do we need to do this on top of that? Well, if we want to be good developers and good citizens, then if we're using the same data on both devices, then we want to make sure that we're pulling that data from the server only once, and then transferring it between your two devices, because we know that our users might not have unlimited data, and so all of the bandwidth that they have is very precious. So make sure you keep this in mind as you're creating these background tasks for your users. OK, last but not least, local notifications. Now, Ellen Shapiro did an amazing talk yesterday on the new notification center. I'll be just going into how this works on the watch, but if you missed it yesterday, I would definitely check out the video. It was awesome. Cool. So with local notifications, these are very similar to push notifications, but they're scheduled locally on the watch. And it's handled by the new user notification center, which is cool and allows management of duplicates sent to both devices. Now here's how we can actually create a scheduled notification. First, we'll want to create the content. So here you can see we want to create a notification content, and then set the content title, body, and any sounds that we want to associate with this particular notification. From there, we'll actually want to schedule how much time later we'll want this notification to be triggered. So here you can see we've set it to be about 5 seconds later. And lastly, we want to schedule the notification with our new notification center in order for us to be able to trigger it at the appropriate time. Another thing that I'd like to cover with local notifications is this really cool thing that allows you to create custom responses for your notifications. So again, another way to drive this user engagement without users actually having to go into their app is through notifications and allowing them to complete any task that they have just through these little triggers on their watch itself. So you can see here we have a to-do app that allows us to both complete or snooze a to-do task. So let's take a look at how to do this. We'll want to first handle this in the user notification center did receive response method. And you can see all we need to do within this response is actually just grab the response, check that action identifier string, and then if it matches the response that you're looking for, then you can handle it appropriately here. OK, so basically, that's pretty much it. The bottom line is that you can use complications, background tasks, and local notifications in order to make your app completely essential without the user having to do anything on their own. What's really important about this is it's a great way of supplementing your current iPhone application with all of these extra things, because now your user, without having to do anything, gets all of these extra benefits and now your app goes from something that might have been kind of cool before to something that is absolutely essential for your user. If you're interested in learning more about watchOS 3, I wrote a few blog posts on some of the key takeaways from WWDC 16, so I would highly recommend that you read these. I've also included some really cool hand scribble notes too for you, so if you're more of a visual learner, that's the way to go. Okay, thank you so much.